The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, each heavy bong echoing in the silence of our home. I was sitting in the dark, the faint glow of a street lamp painting a pale square on the living room floor. I was waiting for Liam. Again. It had become a familiar routine, this quiet vigil. But tonight felt different. A stillness had settled over the house, the kind that comes before a storm. My phone, lying face down on the polished coffee table, suddenly buzzed. The sound was violent in the quiet room. It buzzed again, insistent. I didn't want to look. Some part of me already knew. It was a feeling I'd been pushing down for weeks, a cold knot of dread in my stomach. But you can only ignore the truth for so long before it comes kicking down your door. I reached out and turned the phone over. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. There was no text, just an image. My breath caught in my throat. It was Liam. He was asleep, his face peaceful, one arm thrown over his head the way he always did. He was lying on pale blue sheets I didn't recognize. Draped across his chest was the arm of a woman. A delicate wrist, manicured nails, and held in her hand, resting right over Liam's heart, was a small, black and white photograph, an ultrasound. Then, a second message came through, 5 simple words that shattered everything. He's going to be a wonderful father. A strange coldness spread through me, starting in my chest and radiating out to my fingertips. It wasn't the ice of shock or the fire of rage. It was the hard, clear cold of certainty, the final puzzle piece clicking into place. All the late nights he claimed were for work, the faint scent of a perfume that wasn't mine on his collars, the growing distance in his ice, it all made it terrible. Perfect sense. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. This moment demanded something else. Calmly, I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand perfectly steady. I looked out the window at the quiet, sleeping houses along Maple Street, our perfect little life. I took a slow sip of water, the cold liquid doing nothing to quench the strange new feeling inside me. It felt like steel hardening in my spine. Then I picked up my phone again. I didn't look at the picture. I didn't need to. It was already burned into my memory. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over one name, Dad. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. Clara, is everything okay? I took a breath. My own voice sounded foreign to me, stripped of all emotion. Dad, it's happened. There was a pause on the other end. Then the sound of rustling sheets. He didn't need any more explanation. We both knew this call might come one day. Stay put, he said, his voice now wide awake and firm. I'm on my way. No, I said, my voice unwavering. I'm not staying here. I'm going over there, to his parents' house. I know they're all there. Another pause. Are you sure? Sweetheart, I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I replied. I ended the call before he could argue. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door, slipped on my shoes, and walked out into the cool night air, leaving the lights off in the house that no longer felt like my home. It's funny how quickly a world can shatter. Just a few weeks ago, that same world had felt so solid, so unshakable. Our little yellow house on Maple Street was more than just a place to live. It was the symbol of everything we had built, or rather, everything I thought we had built. We were that couple in our small Ohio town. Liam, the handsome, charming manager at the local manufacturing plant, and me, Clara, the dedicated third-grade teacher at Northwood Elementary. We were the couple everyone smiled at during Sunday service, the ones who always brought a casserole to the neighborhood potluck. On the surface, it was perfect, but beneath the surface, a crack had formed and was slowly splintering its way through our foundation. The crack had a name: infertility. For 3 long years, we had tried to start a family. 3 years of doctor's appointments, of charts and schedules, of whispered hopes and crushing disappointments each month. It became a quiet ache in our home, a ghost that sat between us at the dinner table. The small, empty room upstairs that was supposed to be a nursery remained just a room. filled with boxes and forgotten things. I tried to talk about it, to face it together, but Liam would just retreat. "It'll happen when it happens, Clara," he'd say, his eyes fixed on the television. "We can't stress about it." But someone else was stressing about it for the both of us, his mother, Helen. Helen was a pillar of our community. She ran the church bake sale, organized the town's 4th of July parade, and knew every piece of gossip before it even had a chance to spread. To everyone else, she was a saint. To me, she was a constant, smiling source of pressure. Her concern was always wrapped in the sweet coating of love and piety. "I was just praying for you two this morning," she'd say over Sunday dinner, placing a perfectly roasted chicken on the table. "I told the Lord, please, bless my Liam and Clara. A good man like him deserves to be a father." Every word was a subtle knife, twisting the blame ever so slightly in my direction. She would corner me in the kitchen while I was helping with the dishes. "You know, Clara, my friend's daughter tried this new vitamin. She was pregnant in 2 months. Maybe you should look into it. You have to be proactive." She would pat my arm, her smile never reaching her cold, assessing eyes. Her gaze would often drift to my stomach, a fleeting look of disappointment that made me feel like a complete failure. Liam, her devoted son, was useless in these moments. He would tense up whenever his mother started in on the topic, offering a weak, "Mom, please." But he never truly defended me. He never stood up and said, "Enough. This is between Clara and me." He would just sit there, trapped between his wife's pain and his mother's expectations. And in the last few months, the pressure had clearly taken its toll. The distance I felt from him grew into a chasm. He started staying late for church committee meetings, something he'd never shown an interest in before. He'd come home smelling of cheap coffee and something else, something vaguely floral and sweet. He stopped reaching for my hand when we watched movies. Our conversations became purely functional, about bills and groceries. The man I married was disappearing, replaced by a polite, distant stranger who shared my bed. I tried. God, I tried. One Friday, I cooked his favorite meal pot roast with roasted potatoes and carrots. I lit candles. I put on the soft jazz station he liked. I wanted to find our way back to each other. He didn't come home until almost 10. "Sorry," he mumbled, loosening his tie. "We were planning the fall festival at the church. It just went on and on." He barely touched his food. He looked exhausted, but not from work. It was a different kind of exhaustion, a weariness of the soul. That night, as we lay in bed, backs turned to each other in the darkness, I whispered, "Liam, are we okay?" He was quiet for a long time. I thought he had fallen asleep. Then, he rolled over, and his voice was thick with a strange sort of guilt. "Of course, we are. Don't be silly. I love you." He pulled me closer and held me, but his embrace felt hollow, an apology for something he couldn't say. The next day, he brought me a necklace, a delicate silver chain with a small heart, a peace offering, a distraction. Now, driving through the deserted streets, I clutched the steering wheel, the memory of that hollow embrace making my stomach churn. The town looked different at this hour. The charming storefronts on Main Street were dark and shuttered. The familiar houses, usually so warm and inviting, looked like silent, sleeping witnesses. I turned onto Elm Street, where Liam's parents lived in a large, pristine colonial house with a perfectly manicured lawn. As I pulled up, I saw it. Liam's car was parked in the driveway, and behind it, another car I didn't recognize. A light was on in the living room, a warm yellow glow spilling out onto the lawn. They were waiting for me. This wasn't just a confession. It was an ambush. The photo wasn't an act of jealous rage from a mistress. It was a summons, a calculated move in a game I didn't even know I was playing. My husband's betrayal was one thing, but this felt orchestrated. My mother-in-law's smiling face flashed in my mind, her constant talk of legacy, her subtle dismissals of me. I remembered a passing comment she'd made a few weeks back about a sweet young woman who had recently joined the church choir. A woman named Sarah. I turned off the engine and the silence rushed back in. Heavy and absolute. For a moment, I just sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. The point of no return. I could turn the car around, go home, and fall apart like they expected me to. Or I could walk up to that door, face the wreckage of my life, and demand the truth. I thought of my father's voice on the phone, steady and sure. I thought of the 3 years of silent tears and suffocating hope. I thought of the woman in the picture, holding proof of her fertility over my husband's sleeping body. My hand didn't tremble as I opened the car door. The cold night air hit my face, sharp and real. I walked up the stone path, my steps even and measured. I didn't need to knock. The heavy oak door swung open before I even reached it. And there she was, Helen, my mother-in-law, dressed in a silk robe, her face a perfect mask of feigned sympathy and sorrow. "Clara, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "We were so worried about you. Please, come in. We need to talk." I stepped over the threshold, and the warmth of the house felt suffocating. The air was thick with the scent of potpourri and something else, something cloying and false. It was the smell of a carefully staged scene. The living room was just as I had pictured it. Liam was there, slumped in his father's armchair, his face pale and haggard. He wouldn't look at me. His father, Arthur, stood by the fireplace, his expression unreadable but his posture rigid, a silent sentinel endorsing his wife's actions. And on the floral sofa, next to a cushion embroidered with the words "Bless this home," sat the other woman. She was young, maybe 25, with long, blonde hair and wide, blue eyes. She wore a simple dress and held her hands clasped over a small, barely perceptible curve in her stomach. It was Sarah. I recognized her from the church choir. She looked up at me with an expression that was meant to be apologetic, but it was overshadowed by a flicker of triumph. The room was a tableau of my life's destruction, and Helen was its proud curator. "Thank you for coming, Clara," Helen continued, closing the door behind me. The soft click of the latch sounded like a cell door locking. "We felt it was best to discuss this situation as a family. This isn't a family discussion, Helen," I said, my voice low and even. I kept my eyes on Liam. He flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor. "This is an ambush." Helen's smile tightened. "Now, Clara, there's no need for melodrama. We are all adults here, and we all want what's best for Liam. What's best for Liam, not what's best for us, not what's best for our marriage." The words hung in the air, confirming everything. I was no longer part of the equation. I walked further into the room, my purse held tight in my hand. I didn't sit. I stood in the center of the rug, forcing them all to look up at me. "So this is Sarah," I said, my voice devoid of any inflection. It wasn't a question. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Clara, I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words sounding rehearsed. "We never meant for you to get hurt. You sent me a picture of my husband in bed." I replied flatly. Hurting me was the entire point. I looked from her to Helen, whose expression remained placid. Of course, it was Helen's idea. Break me before I even walked through the door. Make me hysterical, irrational, make me easy to handle. But they had miscalculated. The shock had burned away everything but a cold, hard clarity. Helen stepped forward, taking control. "What's done is done," she said, her tone shifting from concern to brisk authority. "And now we must look to the future. Sarah is carrying Liam's child." She said the words with a deep, resonant satisfaction, as if announcing a royal birth. "This is a blessing, a miracle we have all prayed for." My blood ran cold. She was twisting our years of private pain, our shared grief, and using it as a weapon against me. She was framing my barrenness as a curse that had finally been lifted by this girl. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You couldn't have a grandchild with me, so you found a replacement. That is a cruel way to put it," Arthur said, speaking for the first time. His voice was gravelly. disappointed. This was not planned. Oh, I think it was, I said, turning my gaze to him. Maybe not by your son, but it was planned. Every last detail. Helen waved a dismissive hand. The important thing is the baby, she declared. A Vance baby. Liam has a right to be a father. He deserves that joy. Finally, I looked directly at my husband. He was a shell, a puppet whose strings were being pulled by his mother. Liam, I said, his name a sharp crack in the silence. Is this what you want? Did you want this? He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a pathetic mixture of guilt and fear. Clara, I didn't know what to do. He stammered, his voice breaking. Mom said, we all just want to do the right thing. The right thing? I felt a laugh, sharp and humorless, bubble up in my chest. The right thing would have been to talk to me. The right thing would have been to honor the vows you made to me. In a church, in front of God and all these people you care so much about. The circumstances have changed. Helen interjected smoothly, stepping between us. God has provided a different path, a path to a family. All we are asking is that you be reasonable, that you step aside with grace and dignity. There it was, the final demand. I was not just to be replaced. I was to be a willing participant in my own erasure. I was to smile, nod, and disappear quietly so that their perfect new family could take my place in our little yellow house on Maple Street. You want me to just, what? Pack a bag and leave? I asked, incredulous. We would, of course, be fair. Helen said, we would never see you left with nothing. We want a quiet divorce. No mess, no gossip. It's better for everyone, especially you, dear. A scandal would be so damaging to your reputation as a teacher. It was a threat, wrapped in a silken bow. Don't fight us, or we will ruin you in this town. They would paint me as the bitter, unstable wife, and Sarah as the sweet, innocent mother of Liam's child. And in this town, a town that Helen held in the palm of her hand, they would succeed. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down on me. The sheer, overwhelming injustice. They had thought of everything. They had backed me into a corner, confident in their power, confident in my weakness. They expected tears. They expected me to collapse. But as I stood there, staring at the four people who had conspired to dismantle my life, I felt something shift inside me. The coldness that had settled in my chest began to burn. It was rage, a pure, clean, clarifying rage. My pain was real. My grief was real. And they had no right to it. They had no right to use my body's failings as an excuse for their treachery. I turned my back on Helen and took 2 steps toward my husband. I knelt down in front of his chair so I was at his eye level, forcing him to look at me. Sarah gasped softly. Helen started to protest. Clara, that's enough. I am speaking to my husband, I said, my voice cutting through the air like glass. Silencing her, I looked deep into Liam's watery, defeated eyes. Forget her, I said, my voice a low whisper that was only for him. Forget them. I am asking you, Liam, the man I married, was any of it real? Our life? The last 10 years? Did you ever love me? Or was I just a placeholder until someone better came along? Tears streamed down his face. I did love you. He choked out. I do. I messed up. It's all such a mess. No, I said, standing up, my spine straight as a rod of iron. This is not a mess. A mess is accidental. This was a plan. I looked around the room, at each of their faces. Arthur's stern disapproval, Sarah's wide-eyed fear, Helen's barely concealed fury that her perfect plan was going awry, and Liam's pathetic self-pity. I finally understood. This wasn't a fight for my marriage. That was already dead, and its corpse was sitting in this living room. This was a fight for me, for my dignity, for the truth. They thought my inability to have a child made me worthless. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. I'm not going anywhere, I announced to the silent room. You want a divorce? You'll have to fight me for it. And I promise you, it will not be quiet. It will not be dignified. I will drag every single one of your secrets out into the light for this entire town to see." I turned and walked to the door. I could feel their stunned silence on my back. I opened the door and paused on the threshold, turning back one last time to look at Helen. A real smile, cold and sharp, touched my lips. "You wanted a war," I said. "Congratulations. You've got one." I walked out into the night, shutting the door firmly behind me. I got into my car and sat there for a long moment, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The adrenaline began to fade, and a single, hot tear traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of fury, of grief, and of a strange, terrifying, and liberating new beginning. My life on Maple Street was over. My war had just begun. The drive back to Maple Street was a blur. My mind was a roaring storm of Helen's smug face, Liam's tears, and Sarah's calculated innocence. But underneath the storm, there was a strange, unnerving calm. The calm of a general who has just seen the battlefield for the first time. I knew the terrain. I knew the enemy. I knew this would be fought not with shouts and screams, but with whispers, reputations, and the slow, grinding pressure of community opinion. When I stepped back into my own house, the silence was different. It was no longer the sad, lonely silence of a woman waiting for her husband. It was the charged, electric silence of a headquarters. My home was no longer a sanctuary of shared memories. It had become a fortress. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation began to drain away, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. I sank onto the sofa, the same sofa where Liam and I had cuddled and watched countless movies, and the full weight of my loss hit me. A decade, 10 years of my life, dedicated to a man and a marriage that had been deemed disposable. I thought of our first apartment, the one with the leaky faucet and the paper-thin walls. I thought of our wedding day, the way Liam had looked at me as I walked down the aisle, his eyes shining with what I had believed was pure, unshakable love. Grief, sharp and sudden, pierced through the anger. I wrapped my arms around myself and let out a single, ragged sob. I allowed myself this one moment of weakness. I mourned the man I thought I had married. I mourned the future I thought we would have. And then, I took a deep, shuddering breath and pushed it all down. There would be time for mourning later. Now, there was only time for war. Just as the first hint of dawn was streaking the sky, a pair of headlights swept across the living room wall. My father's truck pulled into the driveway. A few moments later, he was letting himself in with the spare key I'd given him years ago. David Hayes was not a man of many words, but his presence filled the room with a sense of solidity and strength. He looked at my face, at the single tear track on my cheek, and his expression, usually so stoic, softened with a pain that mirrored my own. He didn't hug me right away. Instead, he went to the kitchen and started a pot of coffee, the familiar, comforting sounds filling the tense silence. He brought back 2 mugs, handed one to me, and sat in the armchair opposite the sofa. "Tell me everything," he said simply, and I did. I told him about the picture, the drive, the scene in the living room. I recounted every word of Helen's speech about God's plan and Liam's right to be a father. I told him about the threat to my reputation and my final declaration of war. He listened without interruption, his gaze steady, his retired cop's mind processing every detail, every inconsistency. When I finished, the sky outside was a pale, bruised purple. He took a long sip of his coffee. "Good," he said, setting the mug down. I stared at him. "Good, Dad. My life is falling apart. Your marriage is over. Clara, that happened a long time ago. You just found out last night," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "What's good is that you didn't let them bully you. You didn't sign anything. You didn't run away crying. You stood your ground. That's my girl." He paused, then leaned forward. "So, what's the objective here? What do you want?" I had to think about it. What did I want? I didn't want Liam back. He was a ghost, a coward. I didn't want revenge. Not in the ugly, destructive way Helen would have imagined. I want the truth, I said, the words feeling solid and real as I spoke them. They built this whole story on the idea that I am worthless because I can't have a child. They are trying to erase me and replace me, and they're using a lie to do it. I want everyone in this town, everyone who has ever pitied me or judged me, to know what really happened. I want the truth to be the only thing left standing when the dust settles. My father nodded slowly, a grim smile on his face. Okay, the truth. I can work with that. It's a much better objective than revenge. He went into professional mode, the one he used to use when planning a stakeout. All right, rule number 1, you do not move out of this house. This is your home as much as it is his. If you leave, you're abandoning the property in the eyes of the law. You stay. I don't know if I can sleep in our bed, I whispered. Then he can sleep on the damn couch when he finally gets the nerve to come back here. Rule number 2, not another word to any of them. Not to Liam. Not to his parents. Nothing. From now on. They talk to your lawyer. I don't have a lawyer. You do now. I'll make a call. A friend of a friend in the city. A shark. We need a shark. Not a guppy from around here who plays golf with Arthur. And rule number 3. And this is the most important, he said, his eyes locking with mine. You start thinking like a detective. They've built a story. A lie. All lies have cracks in them. Your job is to find them. Timelines. Receipts. Conversations you overheard. Anything that doesn't fit. Write it all down. His clear, logical plan was a lifeline in my sea of chaos. It gave me purpose beyond the pain. This was something I could do. The first test came sooner than I expected. That afternoon, Liam's car pulled into the driveway. My heart leaped into my throat. He used his key to get in, and he looked even worse than he had the night before. His eyes were red-rimmed. His suit was rumpled. He didn't look at me, but at the empty coffee mugs on the table. My dad was here, I stated. Not a question. Yeah. I saw his truck. Liam mumbled. He stood awkwardly in the entryway, a stranger in his own home. Clara, don't, I said, holding up a hand. My father's voice was in my head. Not another word. There is nothing you can say to me right now, Liam. I want to get some things, he said, his voice small. Fine. He walked past me, a wide circle as if I were contagious, and went upstairs. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to the sounds of drawers opening and closing, the sounds of my life being dismantled. A few minutes later, he came down with a duffel bag. At the door, he paused. My mom, she's telling people at church, she's telling them that we separated amicably, that we both decided it was for the best. She's making it sound peaceful. I know, I said. Of course she was. Helen was already spinning the narrative, laying the groundwork. She would be the gracious matriarch, guiding her family through a difficult but necessary transition with Christian charity. And I would be the quiet, complicit party. Liam looked at me, a flicker of his old self in his eyes, a desperate plea for me to make this easy for him. But that man was gone, and that part of me was gone, too. You should go, Liam, I said, turning my back on him and walking into the kitchen. I heard the front door open, and then click shut. I was alone. The next few days were a lesson in social warfare. Helen's version of the story spread through town like a virus. My neighbor, Kathy, who usually stopped to chat for 20 minutes over the fence, gave me a tight, sad smile and hurried inside. At the grocery store, I saw two women from the church book club whispering furiously, only to fall silent and inspect the avocados with intense interest. The moment I turned down their aisle, the worst was Mrs. Gable, the mother of one of my students. She caught me in the parking lot. Oh, Clara, you poor thing, she said, her voice oozing with a pity that felt like acid. I heard what happened, but you know, sometimes these things are a blessing in disguise. God has a plan for everyone. And now Liam can finally have the family he's always wanted. It's so wonderful for him. I just stared at her, my grocery bags digging into my palms. She was parroting Helen's words, the company line. I was the tragic figure, the obstacle that had been gracefully removed so that a real family could begin. My personal, private agony had become public knowledge, twisted into a narrative that made me a footnote in my own life. I went home, my hands shaking with fury. I unpacked the groceries with robotic precision. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things. Instead, I remembered my father's words. Think like a detective. I went upstairs to the spare room. Liam had only taken clothes. He had left everything else. Photo albums, old yearbooks, boxes of files. I started with his closet. I emptied it, piece by piece. Suits for work, old college sweatshirts, t-shirts from 5K races we'd run together. It was a painful archaeological dig through our shared history. Then, at the bottom of a shoe box filled with old receipts and warranties, I found it. A small, folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a florist, not one in our town, but from a shop in Grove City, 30 minutes away. It was dated 6 weeks ago. The purchase was for a bouquet of white lilies. The note on the order read, "For Sarah. Thinking of you. H. Helen. White lilies. The flowers of sympathy. The flowers you give at a funeral." Why would Helen be sending Sarah sympathy flowers 6 weeks ago? It didn't make sense. According to the story, 6 weeks ago was when Sarah and Liam were supposed to be falling in love, starting their miraculous new chapter. You don't send sympathy flowers for that. You send roses. I sat on the floor, the small piece of paper in my hand. It was nothing. It was everything. It was a crack in their perfect story. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was going to pry that crack open until their whole lie shattered into a million pieces. The florist's receipt felt like the first solid clue in a case full of whispers and lies. White lilies. A gesture of condolence. It was a single note played out of key in Helen's carefully composed symphony, and I couldn't get it out of my head. For days, I turned it over and over in my mind, trying to understand its significance. What was Helen offering sympathy for? My life had settled into a new, surreal routine. I'd go to work, plaster a serene smile on my face for my third graders, and then come home to my silent house and my war room. I'd made a corkboard, just like the ones in the detective shows my dad used to watch. In the center, I pinned the receipt. Round it, I started pinning other small scraps of information. A timeline of Liam's late nights, a list of the members of the church choir, the name of the doctor Sarah was supposedly seeing, a name I'd overheard Helen mention to a friend, my father's lawyer, a woman from Columbus named Ms. Davies, was exactly as he'd described. She was a shark in a tailored suit. Our first phone call was brief and brutally efficient. "Forget your emotions, Clara," she'd said, her voice sharp and devoid of sympathy. "Emotions are liabilities. We will operate on facts. They have a story. We will dismantle it. They want a quiet settlement. We will make it clear that the price of silence is astronomical." She instructed me to forward her any evidence I found, no matter how small. The social isolation continued. It was a cold, quiet punishment. Invitations to neighborhood barbecues stopped coming. My phone, once buzzing with texts from friends, fell silent. I was being politely, but firmly, excommunicated from the life I had known. They were all choosing sides, and no one was choosing mine. Liam, I heard through the town grapevine, was living with his parents. He and Sarah were now a public couple, attending church together, their hands clasped in a show of unified purpose. Helen would watch them from her pew, a beatific smile on her face, the perfect picture of a family overcoming adversity. My only ally was my father. He'd stop by every other evening, bringing groceries or just sitting with me in the quiet living room. He never offered empty platitudes. Instead, he'd ask, "What did you find today?" He was my partner in this investigation, my rock. Nothing connects, I told him one evening. gesturing to my board of disparate facts. It's all just noise. I feel like I'm going crazy. That's what they want, he said, studying the board. They want to isolate you and make you doubt your own mind. But you're not crazy. You're just missing a piece of the puzzle. His eyes landed on the florist receipt. This is the key. Why lilies? Why Grove City? People in town buy flowers from the shop on Main Street. Going 30 minutes out of your way, that's deliberate. That's hiding something. His words sparked an idea. Hiding. The next morning, I told the principal at my school I needed to take a personal day. Then I got in my car and drove the 30 minutes to Grove City. The flower shop was a small, charming place tucked between a bookstore and a cafe. An older woman with kind eyes was arranging daisies in a vase. I took a deep breath and approached the counter. "Hi," I started, trying to sound casual. "This is a bit of a strange question, but a friend of mine received some flowers from your shop about 6 weeks ago, and I wanted to send her the same arrangement. The problem is, I'm not sure what they were." The woman smiled. "Well, do you know your friend's name?" "We keep records." "Sarah," I said, my heart beginning to pound. "Sarah Reed." The woman's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of recognition and something else, pity. "Ah, yes, Sarah. Such a sweet girl. It was a terrible thing that happened." She tapped a few keys on her computer. "Here it is. A bouquet of white lilies." The card message was, "Oh, we don't usually share that." "I understand," I said, leaning in slightly, lowering my voice. "It's just that I'm a friend from her old church group. We were all so devastated for her. About her mother." It was a complete shot in the dark, a wild guess based on nothing but the flowers. The woman's eyes softened completely. "Oh, you're from her church. God bless you." "Yes, it was her mother's funeral. Such a shock. A heart attack, I believe. Helen Vance ordered them. She's a wonderful woman. Always so thoughtful." I felt a dizzying rush of vertigo. Sarah's mother had died 6 weeks ago, the day Helen sent the lilies. The day before Liam's late nights at the church committee meetings had started in earnest. This wasn't a gesture of sympathy for a new love affair. It was a gesture of condolence for a grieving daughter. And Helen had been there from the very beginning. She hadn't stumbled upon this affair. She had cultivated it. She had found a young woman at her most vulnerable grieving. Alanian had seen not a person, but an opportunity, an incubator. I thanked the woman, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. I walked out of the shop and got into my car, my mind racing. This was it. This was the piece I was missing. Helen had manipulated Sarah, using her grief as a lever to pry her way into her life. She'd offered comfort, support, a shoulder to cry on. She'd presented herself as a mother figure, and then she had presented her son. I drove back home, not in a rush, but slowly, methodically. The anger I felt was so cold and so deep it was almost peaceful. This was beyond infidelity. This was predatory. It was a level of cold-blooded calculation that I could barely comprehend. When I got home, I emailed Ms. Davies, detailing what I had found at the flower shop. Her reply was almost immediate. "Good work, Clara. This establishes premeditation. It changes everything. Stay the course." That evening, I decided to do something I hadn't done since the night it all began. I went to the Wednesday evening prayer service at the church. I needed to see them. I needed to look at them with this new knowledge in my eyes. I slipped into a back pew just as the service was starting, and there they were, in the third row. Liam, Sarah, and Helen, sitting side by side. Sarah looked pale and thin. She leaned against Liam, not like a lover, but like someone seeking shelter from a storm. Liam had his arm around her, but his eyes were vacant, staring at the stained glass window. And Helen sat straight and proud, a matriarch protecting her flock. During the Peace Be With You portion of the service, where everyone turns to greet their neighbors, Helen's eyes scanned the congregation and landed on me. Surprise flickered across her face. quickly replaced by a cool, confident smile. She gave me a small, condescending nod, as if to say, "Look at you, all alone, and look at me. I have won." But she didn't see the woman she had broken. I held her gaze, and for the first time, I didn't look away. I didn't let her see my pain or my anger. I just looked at her, my expression unreadable. I let her see that I was still here, that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't gone. I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes before she turned away. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. After the service, I didn't rush out. I watched as people gathered around them, offering congratulations to Liam and sympathetic pats to Sarah. It was a masterclass in public relations, but I saw things differently now. I saw a grieving, vulnerable girl trapped in a role she was forced to play. I saw a weak man suffocating under the weight of his mother's ambition. And I saw a cruel, manipulative woman willing to destroy anyone to get what she wanted. I left the church and walked home under the streetlights of Maple Street. The air was cool and crisp. I no longer felt like a victim in this story. I was the detective. I was the historian. And I was the only one who knew the truth. They thought they had buried me, but they had only planted a seed. And now, I was starting to grow. The discovery at the flower shop hardened my resolve into something sharp and unyielding. It was the midpoint of the war, the moment I transitioned from defense to offense. Helen hadn't just taken advantage of a situation. She had engineered it, using a young woman's grief as her primary tool. This knowledge armed me with a cold fury that burned brighter than any heartache. Ms. Davies was methodical. Premeditation is powerful, she explained over the phone. But it's her word against a florist's memory. We need more. We need something that links Helen's actions directly to Liam and Sarah's affair. Something undeniable. My focus shifted. I was no longer just digging into the past. I was observing the present with a new, critical eye. I started paying attention to the small-town ecosystem in a way I never had before. I listened to the gossip at the teacher's lounge, not as a subject of it, but as an intelligence gatherer. I read the community news bulletin with an almost forensic intensity. The narrative Helen was weaving was one of idyllic domesticity. She made sure the church newsletter included a photo of Liam and Sarah volunteering at the fall food drive, Sarah's hands gently resting on her stomach. She told anyone who would listen how thrilled she was to be redecorating the spare room in her house into a nursery. Pale yellow, she'd say with a sigh of contentment. So calming for a baby. She was building a fortress of public opinion, brick by sanctimonious brick. My own life, in contrast, felt like it was shrinking. The quiet judgment was constant. I knew that to many, my refusal to grant Liam a quiet divorce looked like bitterness. They saw a woman scorned, unable to let go with grace. They didn't see a woman fighting for the truth. My father was my anchor. He noticed the toll the isolation was taking. One evening, he came over with 2 fishing rods. "We're going to the lake tomorrow morning," he announced. Sunrise, no arguments. The next morning, sitting in a small boat on the still, misty water as the sun bled orange and pink across the horizon, I felt a moment of peace for the first time in months. "You know," my dad said, his eyes on his line, "when I was a rookie, there was this one case, a robbery. Everyone was convinced it was this one kid with a record. All the evidence seemed to point his way. The pressure to close the case was immense." He reeled in his line and cast it out again. But my gut told me it was too neat, too perfect. So I kept digging, ignored my sergeant, my partner. Everyone thought I was crazy, chasing a ghost. Turns out, the kid was set up. The real thief was the shop owner, trying to collect the insurance money. The perfect evidence had all been planted. He looked at me. "People build perfect stories for a reason, Clara. It's usually to hide an imperfect truth. You just have to keep pulling at the threads." His story was exactly what I needed to hear. I went home feeling renewed. My focus sharpened. It was time to pull at a new thread, Sarah. I knew confronting her directly would be a disaster. Helen had her completely under her control. But I needed to understand her side of the story. What promises had Helen made? What threats had she used? I started by doing something I probably should have done weeks ago. I looked her up. It wasn't hard in a town our size. Sarah Reed, 25. Her social media was sparse, mostly pictures of her and her mom from years ago. Her mother, it turned out, had been a single parent, a nurse at the local clinic. They seemed incredibly close. Sarah's page went dark about 2 months ago. The last post was a smiling selfie of her and her mother at a county fair. A week later, her mother was dead. I learned she worked part-time, shelving books at the town library. It was the perfect, quiet place, unthreatening. One chose my moment carefully. A sleepy Tuesday afternoon. She was in the local history aisle, her back to me, placing books on a cart. She looked smaller in person, more fragile than she had in Helen's living room. "Sarah," I said softly. She jumped, spinning around. Her eyes went wide with panic when she saw me. She looked like a cornered animal. "Clara, I can't talk to you," she stammered, looking around frantically as if Helen might materialize from behind a bookshelf. "I'm not here to yell at you," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I just have one question, and I think you owe me the answer." She clutched a book to her chest like a shield. "Helen said I shouldn't." "Of course she did," I interrupted gently. "But this isn't about Helen. It's about you. When your mother passed away, you were alone, weren't you?" Tears instantly welled in her eyes. The mention of her mother was the key, the one thing that broke through Helen's conditioning. She nodded, biting her lip to keep from sobbing. "And Helen was there for you," I continued, piecing it together. "She brought you food. She helped with the funeral arrangements. She told you she would be like a mother to you now." Sarah's composure crumbled. A tear spilled over and ran down her cheek. "She was so kind," she whispered, her voice thick with a confusion that broke my heart. "My mom was all I had. I was so scared. Helen, she was like an angel. And then she introduced you to her son." I finished. "A good man. A man who could give you the family you just lost. All you had to do was give her what she wanted. A grandchild." Sarah looked at me, her expression a mix of horror and dawning realization. It was clear she had never seen the sequence of events laid out so plainly, so transactionally. She had been living in a fog of grief and gratitude, and I had just turned on a searchlight. She said you and Liam weren't happy." Sarah whispered. "She said you didn't want children, that you were breaking his heart. She said I would be saving him." The lie was so audacious, so cruel. It took my breath away. Helen hadn't just used Sarah's grief. She had used my pain as the reason, painting me as a villain to justify her scheme. She lied. "Sarah," I said simply, "for 3 years, all I wanted was to have a baby with my husband." The truth of my words hit her. I saw it in her eyes. The carefully constructed world Helen had built for her began to fracture. She saw herself not as a savior, but as a pawn. "What's going to happen?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm going to expose the truth," I said. "All of it. But I'm not going to destroy you in the process. You are a victim in this, too. But you have a choice. You can continue to be her pawn, or you can start telling the truth. Think about what your mother would want you to do." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the silent aisle. I didn't know if I had gotten through to her. I didn't know if she would have the courage to stand up to Helen. But I had planted a seed of doubt, and sometimes, that's all it takes. The very next Sunday was the annual church picnic, a major event in our town's social calendar. It was Helen's magnum opus. I knew I had to go, to show my face, to show I wasn't hiding. As I was getting ready, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, hesitant. "Hello." It was Sarah. Her voice was a terrified whisper. "I can't do this anymore," she said. Her words rushed. "She's not who I thought she was. She controls everything. What I eat, who I talk to. She told me the baby is hers, not mine. She said I am just a vessel, The horror in her voice was palpable. "There's something you need to know, Clara, about the baby. It's not what she thinks." Before I could ask what she meant, the line went dead. I stood there, my hand gripping the phone. A vessel. The word was chilling, but it was her last sentence that echoed in my mind. It's not what she thinks. What did that mean? A new, shocking possibility began to form in my mind. A twist so profound it could bring the entire house of cards tumbling down. I finished getting ready, my hands moving with a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just going to the picnic to show my face. I was going to find out what Sarah meant. The cow trow was no longer a distant event. It was here. It was now. And it was going to happen in front of the entire town. The annual church picnic was the social centerpiece of our town's summer. It was held in the sprawling green park behind the old stone church. A Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Families spread blankets on the grass. Children chased each other with water guns. And the air was thick with the smell of barbecue and freshly cut lawn. It was a scene of perfect, wholesome community. A perfect stage for a public execution. I walked onto the field, and a ripple of silence followed me. Conversations didn't stop abruptly, but they lulled. Heads turned, and whispers followed in my wake like the rustling of dry leaves. I was a ghost at their feast. I ignored them, my eyes scanning the crowd for one person. Helen. She was exactly where I knew she would be, holding court near the main pavilion. She was surrounded by the town's most influential figure's mayor, the bank president, the head of the school board. Liam and Sarah were positioned on either side of her, like royal attendants. Liam looked deeply uncomfortable, his smile strained. Sarah just looked terrified, her eyes wide and unfocused as she stared at the crowd. I didn't approach them. Not yet. I just needed them to see me. I walked over to the lemonade stand, poured myself a cup, and found an empty patch of grass under a large oak tree, far enough away to be alone, but close enough to watch. I sat down and took a slow, deliberate sip. I could feel Helen's eyes on me, burning a hole in my back. My presence was an act of defiance, a disruption to her perfect day. For an hour, I sat there. People gave me a wide berth. It was a lonely, painful experience, but I endured it. I was waiting for the right moment, and I knew Helen, in her arrogance, would provide one. Sure enough, after the three-legged races and the pie-eating contest, Pastor Mike tapped the microphone on the pavilion stage. "Friends, neighbors, before we announce the raffle winners, Helen Vance has a few words she'd like to share with us all." A smattering of polite applause followed. Helen ascended the 2 steps to the stage with the grace of a queen. She took the microphone, her face beaming with practiced warmth. "Thank you, Pastor Mike," she began, her voice resonating through the speakers. "I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all for being here, for being part of this wonderful community, this big family." She paused, letting her eyes sweep over the crowd. "And as you know, families grow and change. They are blessed with new life, and our family is about to be blessed." She reached down and beckoned for Liam and Sarah to join her. Liam hesitated, but Sarah, with a gentle push from behind by Arthur, walked woodenly to the stage. Helen wrapped an arm around each of them. "My son, Liam, and this dear girl, Sarah, are expecting a child," Helen announced, as if no one already knew. "A child who will grow up here, among all of you. A child who will carry on the Vance name and be a part of this town's future." The crowd applauded, a mix of genuine excitement and polite obligation. It was the moment she had been building towards for months. The public consecration of her new, chosen family. The final, public erasure of me. This was my cue. As the applause died down, I stood up. I left my cup on the grass and began to walk toward the stage. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just walked, my steps calm and even. A path seemed to clear before me as people turned and stared, their eyes wide with shock and anticipation. The whispering grew louder. I stopped at the bottom of the steps. The whole park was silent now. Every eye was on me. Helen's smile froze on her face. A flicker of pure fury crossed her features before being replaced by a mask of condescending pity. "Clara, dear," she said into the microphone, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "This is hardly the time or the place." "I think it's the perfect time and place," I replied, my voice clear and steady. It didn't need a microphone to carry in the dead silence. "You're talking about family, about blessings, about the Vance name. I just have a question." I looked past her, directly at Liam, who looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Then I looked at Sarah, who was trembling, her eyes fixed on me in a silent, desperate plea. "You've talked so much about this baby, Helen," I continued, my gaze returning to her, "about how it's an answer to your prayers, how it will carry on the family legacy. That's so important to you, isn't it? The legacy." "Of course it is," Helen said, her grip tightening on the microphone. "A strong family is built on a strong legacy, a legacy carried by a son." "You mean," I said, it wasn't a question, "a strong boy to carry the Vance name into the next generation. That's the real prayer you've been hoping would be answered, isn't it?" A murmur went through the crowd. I had touched a nerve, an old-fashioned truth that everyone understood, but no one said aloud. Helen's face flushed. "A healthy baby is all anyone prays for." "Clara, you're being hysterical." "Am I?" I gave a small, sad smile. "Well, I just want to be the first to congratulate you, because I know how much you love and cherish this new addition to your family. I'm sure you will give your granddaughter all the love in the world." The word hung in the air. Granddaughter. For a second, there was only confusion. Then, I saw the slow, dawning horror on Helen's face. Her mind was racing, trying to understand how I could possibly know. Her eyes darted to Sarah, who was now openly weeping. "What are you talking about?" Helen snapped, her voice losing its polished edge. "I'm talking about the baby," I said calmly. "Your grandchild, the one Sarah is carrying. She's a girl, Helen, a beautiful, healthy baby girl." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I held it up. On the screen was a picture, an image of an official doctor's report from Sarah's last appointment. I didn't have to say that Sarah had sent it to me after her terrified phone call. Everyone in that park could connect the dots. The mask on Helen's face didn't just crack. It shattered. The beatific, loving grandmother vanished, and in her place was a woman consumed by raw, ugly fury. She wasn't looking at me. She was glaring at Sarah, a look of utter betrayal and disgust on her face. In that one look, her entire story fell apart. Her pretense of unconditional love was exposed as a lie. She didn't want a baby. She wanted an heir. And in her eyes, a girl was not enough. The silence in the park was absolute, broken only by Sarah's quiet sobs. Everyone saw it. Everyone understood. They saw the manipulation, the cold ambition, the truth stripped bare. Liam stared at his mother, his face a canvas of dawning horror, finally seeing her for who she truly was. Arthur, standing by the side of the stage, closed his eyes and bowed his head in shame. I had done what I came to do. I didn't need to say another word. The truth wasn't a bomb I had thrown. It was a mirror I had held up, and the reflection had destroyed them. I turned my back on the stage, on the wreckage of the Vance family, and walked away. The whispers that followed me now were not of pity for me, but of shock and judgment for them. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, out of the park and back onto the quiet, tree-lined street, leaving the ruins of their perfect story behind me. The aftermath of the church picnic was not a loud explosion, but a slow, quiet implosion. The truth, once revealed, sent fractures through the foundations of the Vance family and their standing in the community. I didn't need to fan the flames. The town's gossip mill, once my tormentor, was now doing the work for me. The story of Helen's public unmasking spread from backyard fences to the aisles of the grocery store. The narrative had been irrevocably flipped. Helen was no longer the benevolent matriarch. She was a manipulative schemer. Sarah was not a homewrecker. but a victim. And I was no longer the pitiful, barren wife. I was the woman who had dared to speak the truth. I didn't hear from Liam or his family directly. The silence from their house on Elm Street was deafening. But I heard the stories. I heard that Helen had locked herself in her home, refusing to answer the phone or attend Sunday service for the first time in 30 years. I heard that Arthur was seen having a long, tense lunch with his lawyer. But the most significant piece of news came from my father. He'd heard from a friend at the police department that Sarah Reed had gone to the station, not to press charges, but to give a voluntary statement. She had told them everything, how Helen had approached her after her mother's death, the promises that were made, the pressure she was under. She had also, my father told me, moved out of the Vance house and was staying with a cousin in a neighboring town. She had freed herself. Her quiet act of courage was the final nail in the coffin of Helen's lies. A week after the picnic, I came home from school to find Liam's car in the driveway. A different kind of dread filled me now. Not fear, but a weary exhaustion. I was done fighting. He was sitting on the front steps, looking like a man who had lost everything. When he saw me, he stood up slowly. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" I nodded and led him inside. The house felt strange with him in it, like a ghost had returned to haunt its former life. We sat in the living room, in the same chairs we'd sat in 1,000 times before. But the space between us was a vast, unbridgeable canyon. "I've moved out of my parents' house," he began, staring at his hands. "I'm staying at a motel. I saw my mother for who she is. Clara, for the first time." The way she looked at Sarah on that stage, it wasn't about a grandchild. It was about winning. It was always about winning. And I let her use me. I let her use you. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a shame so profound it was almost painful to witness. "I was a coward. You were grieving our loss, our inability to have a family, and I couldn't face it. It felt like my failure. And she gave me an easy way out. A way to feel like a man, a provider, a success. She told me it was God's plan. I think I knew it was wrong, deep down. But I wanted to believe her because I was too weak to face the truth with you." He took a ragged breath. "I destroyed everything. Our life, my own integrity, your love. And I am so sorry. It's a pathetic word. I know. It doesn't fix anything. But it's all I have." I listened to him, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel rage or the desire for revenge. I just felt a deep, profound sadness, a sadness for the man he could have been, for the marriage we could have had if he had only been strong enough. "I believe you're sorry, Liam," I said, and I meant it. "But being sorry doesn't change what happened. You made a choice. You chose her voice over mine. You chose her plan over our vows." "I know," he whispered. I've told my lawyer to agree to whatever Ms. Davies proposes. The house, the savings, it's all yours. I don't deserve any of it." It wasn't about the house or the money anymore. It was about closing a chapter. "Okay, Liam," I said, my voice soft. "Okay." That was it. There were no more tears, no more recriminations. Just the quiet, heavy acknowledgement of an ending. He stood up, gave me one last, broken look, and walked out of my life for good. A few days later, Ms. Davies called. The Vances had agreed to a divorce settlement that was far more generous than I had ever expected. The house was mine. I had more than enough money to live comfortably, to start over completely. The price of their silence had been steep, but for them, it was worth it to make the scandal disappear. Arthur Vance, ever the pragmatist, was cutting his losses and protecting what was left of his family's name. With the legal papers signed, a strange sense of quiet descended. The war was over. I had won, but victory felt hollow. I stood alone in the center of the living room, surrounded by the spoils of a war I never wanted to fight. I had the house. I had my name back. I had the truth. But I was also alone, in a town that would forever associate me with the biggest scandal it had seen in a generation. I looked around at the furniture, the photos on the wall, the life I had so carefully built. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It was a museum of a person I no longer was. This house wasn't a fortress or a home. It was a cage, filled with the ghosts of my past. My father came over that evening. I had told him about the settlement, about my final conversation with Liam. He brought a bottle of champagne to celebrate, but he found me in the living room with a stack of empty boxes. "What's all this?" he asked, looking at the box labeled kitchen. "I'm selling the house," I said, my voice clear and certain. "I'm moving." He didn't look surprised. He just nodded slowly. "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. And for the first time, the not knowing didn't feel scary. It felt like freedom. Somewhere new. Somewhere no one knows my story. Somewhere I can just be Clara. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet pride. "You're not the same woman who called me that night, crying in the dark." "No," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "I'm not." That night, I didn't pack. I walked through my house one last time. I touched the frame of the doorway where Liam and I had marked our heights when we first moved in. I stood in the empty room upstairs that was meant to be a nursery, and I felt a pang of the old grief, the ghost of the life I had lost. I allowed myself to feel it, to honor it, but it no longer had power over me. It was a part of my story, but it was not the whole story. The woman they had tried to break, the woman they had dismissed as worthless, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had walked through fire and learned she was fireproof. I was ready for the next chapter. 1 year later, the ocean breeze tasted of salt and new beginnings. I stood on the balcony of my small apartment, a cup of coffee warming my hands, and watched the morning sun paint streaks of gold across the waves. I had moved to Charleston, South Carolina, a city chosen almost at random from a map. A place where the past was history, not a burden. A place where no one knew the name Vance or the sad story of the teacher from Maple Street. Here, I was just Clara Hayes, a woman with a quiet smile who taught 3rd grade at a sun-drenched elementary school, a few blocks from the sea. Selling the house in Ohio had been the final, definitive act of severing my old life. The moving truck pulling away from Maple Street felt less like an ending and more like an escape. I had left behind the whispers, the pitying looks, and the ghosts that haunted every corner. I had packed only what mattered: my books, my father's fishing rod, and a single box of photographs from my childhood. I left the wedding albums behind. My father had helped me drive down, his quiet presence a comfort during the long, 2-day journey. When we arrived at my new, empty apartment, he'd simply hugged me and said, "Build something beautiful, Clara." It was the only advice I needed, and I had. My life now was small, simple, and entirely my own. I found joy in the little things: the walk to school each morning under the canopy of live oak trees, the sound of my students' laughter, the weekend farmer's market with its vibrant produce and friendly faces. I joined a pottery class, finding a strange, grounding satisfaction in shaping lumps of clay into something new with my own 2 hands. I made tentative new friendships, women who knew nothing of my scars, who liked me for my dry sense of humor and my terrible pottery skills. I was healing. The deep, gaping wound of Liam's betrayal and Helen's cruelty had slowly, over time, begun to close. It had left a scar, a permanent part of my landscape, but it no longer ached with every breath. It was simply a reminder of a battle I had fought and survived. My value, I had come to realize, was not tied to my ability to have a child or my status as a wife. My value was inherent. It was in my resilience, my kindness, my strength. It was something no one could ever take from me again. Sometimes, my mind would drift back to Ohio. My dad kept me updated with the broad strokes. The Vance family had largely withdrawn from public life. Arthur had retired, and Liam had been transferred to a different branch of the company in another state. Helen was still in town, but she was a shadow of her former self, her social influence shattered. And Sarah, I had learned, had given birth to a healthy baby girl. She had named her Hope, a quiet, beautiful act of defiance. She was raising her daughter on her own, with the help of her cousin, far away from the oppressive influence of the Vances. I found myself wishing her nothing but peace. We were two women whose lives had been thrown into chaos by the same storm, and we had both found our way to shore. This morning, as I stood on my balcony, my phone buzzed with a text from my dad. It was a picture of him holding a massive fish, a proud grin on his face. "Thinking of you." The message read. I smiled and texted back, "He's a monster. Love you." As I set my phone down, an email notification popped up. The subject line made my breath catch in my throat. From Liam. My heart gave a familiar, painful thud. It had been over a year since I had heard from him. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the delete button. Part of me wanted to erase it, to pretend it didn't exist, to keep my new life pure and untouched by the past. But another part, a stronger part, knew that healing wasn't about pretending the wound was never there. It was about being able to touch the scar without flinching. I opened the email. It wasn't long. There were no excuses, no pleas for forgiveness. It was just a simple, stark admission. "Clara, I know you don't owe me anything, least of all your time to read this, but I had to write it. I've been in therapy for the past year. I've been forced to look at myself, at my weakness, at the way I let my mother's voice become louder than my own conscience. I let it become louder than my love for you. I'm not writing to ask you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. I am writing because I need you to know that I see it now. I see the incredible woman I lost. I see the strength you had that I lacked. You stood up to my family, to the whole town, all alone, to fight for the truth. You were a warrior, and I was the coward who ran from the battle. I heard you moved. I hope you're happy. You deserve a life filled with peace and joy. You deserve everything good in this world. Liam." I read the email twice. The words didn't magically erase the years of pain or the sharp agony of his betrayal, but they offered something unexpected: closure. He finally understood. He finally saw the truth for what it was, not the twisted version his mother had created. His apology wasn't for me. It was for him. It was the sound of a man finally taking responsibility for the ruins he had created. I looked out at the ocean, at the endless expanse of blue meeting the sky. The world felt vast and full of possibility. I thought about the woman I was a year ago, shattered and fighting for her life in a town that had turned its back on her. And I thought about the woman I was now, standing in the sun, scarred but whole. I took a sip of my coffee. It had gone cold. With a steady hand, I selected the email and moved it to the trash. I didn't need to reply. I didn't need to hold on to his apology or his regret. His journey was his own now, and so was mine. A group of children laughed on the beach below, their joyful shrieks carrying on the wind. My students would be arriving at school soon, full of stories about their weekends. I had lesson plans to review, a life to live. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and placed it in the drying rack. I grabbed my keys and my bag, and as I walked out the door into the bright Charleston morning, a genuine, peaceful smile spread across my face. My old life wasn't a tragedy. It was a prologue, and the real story, my story, was just beginning.